Yes? To eat or
First
have you been to the museum?
Museum
Really?
and eat. That was 10 years ago.
Love it. Come back. All right, guys, welcome to the tavern. My name is Laurel, and I'll be your docent for the next hour or so, or however long you can stand my voice. So, I'm going to start off with the history of the building. So this building is one of the oldest buildings in Manhattan. It was built in 1719 by a young couple named Stephen Delancey and Anne Van Cortlandt.
Anne Van Cortlandt, Stephen.
So if you guys are you guys from, actually I forgot to ask, are you guys from the city, live in the area?
Yes.
Awesome, so you might be familiar with those names. Delancey Street is a little uptown. Also we have Van Cortlandt Park all the way uptown.
And Van Cortlandt Park is the Bronx. Okay.
Yep. So Stephen Delancey and Anne Van Cortlandt are a young couple, and they built this structure intended to be their family residence. However, if you've stepped outside the tavern, you know that this is really quite a commercial area. It's very busy. So they decided that it wasn't right to raise the family, and they moved uptown. They sold the building in 1720 to a man named Henry Holt.
720.
1720, Henry Holt, he opened it up as a dance studio. And so he was holding dance lessons and balls and things like that, and then throughout the succeeding decades, besides the dance studio, it was a warehouse, office space, storage space, you name it. Everybody was really interested in taking over this space because of the location. Because at the time, Pearl Street was Dock Street because it was the edge of Manhattan. And then over the centuries, we obviously built on the southern tip of Manhattan a little bit, but at that time, Pearl Street was Dock Street because that's where the dock was. So if you can imagine, it was even busier than it is today because you were right next to all of the ships docking. And then after it was called Dock Street, it was actually named Queen Street, and this was the Queen's Head Tavern because it was on Queen Street. Then after the Revolution, we got rid of everything named after the Queen for obvious reasons. So it became Pearl Street because the street was littered with oyster shells, which is the most adorable fact ever. Yes.
I was for a few times. I was on the Delancey Street. How come before it was also green, it was orange and white?
What was?
And the street signs.
Street signs. Oh, I've seen that before. I
The
guess.
street signs on Delancey are those colors?
Different colors than the rest of the city, right?
I never noticed.
Orange and white.
Interesting. I wonder if they're old or new.
Here, look over here.
Like that color?
And the orange here, and the white over here.
Interesting. I never noticed that. I'll have to check that out. Thank you.
I
So,
was shocked when I saw that, man.
so 1762, Samuel Fraunces buys up the building and opens up the Queen's Head Tavern. And before I get ahead of myself, I'm going to stop talking about the history of the tavern a little bit. And since we're in the flag gallery, take advantage of talking about flags a little bit. I'm going to talk about the evolution of our flag over on this wall, starting with a flag that looks nothing like our flag today.
I noticed that it's a British flag.
Exactly. So, this flag over here, this is the St. Andrew's cross flag. St. Andrews was the patron saint of Scotland. Moving a little bit over, this is the St. George cross flag. St. George was the patron saint of England. And this flag is actually really old. It was flown during the Crusades, so 11th to 13th centuries. And you're kind of thinking, okay, where are we going with this? These flags are from different countries and don't look like ours. However, hopefully this flag looks a little familiar to you guys. The first two flags combined. Over here we have the King's Cross colors.
Yeah, I mentioned about British flag.
Exactly. So this is like the precursor to the modern Union Jack. Once Wales becomes a part of the United Kingdom, there's another red stripe added over here. But for now, it is just Scotland and England, and this is the King's Cross colors. The King's Cross colors, this flag, was the first flag pitched on the east coast of American soil when they came over to colonize. So, with this flag in mind, super British flag, I'm going to skip that flag, and I'm going to start to talk about a flag that starts to look like the flag that we have today, right? We have the 13 stripes for the 13 original colonies. Yeah, America. However, up top in the corner, we have the King's Cross Colors flag, kind of shrunk into the corner of this flag. This is the Continental or Union flag. It was the first unofficial flag of our country because it was never sanctioned by Congress, but it was flown between 1775 and 1777. So thinking about that time frame, the very beginning of the Revolutionary War. Does anyone have anything to say about this flag? I mean, it's kind of mixed signals. We have the 13 stripes for the 13 original colonies.
The red,
but
white,
we
and
have-
stripes, that's part of the United States flag, and the British flag from England. It's mixed.
It's mixed. So this is called the Continental Flag, but I like to call it the Compromise Flag because we have a little bit of both, and this kind of gives you mixed signals. And the reason for that was at the beginning of the Revolutionary War, as I mentioned, 1775, this flag was first made, is at that time, as America as a whole, we were very conflicted with whether we wanted to become independent from Great Britain or not. Hey guys.
Hi.
I just started my tour, so obviously welcome.
Thank you.
So, talking about the Continental Union flag, this is the first unofficial flag of our country because it was never sanctioned by Congress. Taking a closer look at it, we have the 13 stripes for the 13 original colonies. Up top, though, we have the King's Cross colors, which represent Great Britain. And so I was just discussing why we have this flag, because it's kind of giving you mixed signals. Do we want to be free, or do we want to still be loyal to Great Britain? And at that time, when this flag was first made in 1775, we were quite divided. We still had a lot of loyalists, as well as people that wanted to gain our freedom from Great Britain. So, as I mentioned, even though this is the Continental flag, I like to call it the Compromise flag, because it really made both parties happy. Yay, we have the 13 stripes, but we also have the King's Cross colors up top. So, moving on a little bit, I'm going to skip over to a flag that hopefully you guys recognize. This is the Betsy flag with the 13 stripes for the 13 original colonies, as well as the 13 stars up top. Now, little known fact is that we didn't ultimately at first make the decision. This flag looks a lot like the flag we have today. We have the 13 stripes, but we added a star for every state once we added it. However, at the beginning, when we started to add a star for every state that came into the United States, we also added a stripe. So at one point in time, we had 14 stars and 14 stripes, and 15 stripes and 15 stars, and so on. And then we got to about the mid-20s, 24, 25, and the seamstresses were having a difficult time making these flags because the stripes were so little. Could you imagine 25 stripes on this flag? So we decided to stop adding stripes and only add stars. It was a lot easier. So we kept the 13 stripes for the 13 original colonies, but we added a star for every new state. And then 1960, we added Hawaii, the 50th state of the United States, and that's where we're at today. So does anybody have any questions about evolution of our flag?
Everything was good a few years ago, and they once wanted to make Puerto Rico a state. What happened to that?
I'm not sure. Does anybody know why Puerto Rico isn't a state today? I know it's part of the United States, but it's not officially a state.
All right.
It's a country, still part of the country.
The country is a province of the United States.
Right.
And they talked about making a state out of that.
Yeah, well, we don't know. That's a good question, Donald.
That's not the area of history I'm focused on, but I like the question.
Yes.
You had a question as well?
But are we allowed to use flash in the museum?
Yep. Everywhere you can take pictures except for the long room downstairs, which is where I'll be ending.
I mean, like right here?
Yeah, of course, go for it.
Oh, okay.
Encourage it as well. There's also a photo booth back here that I
Oh,
encourage
okay.
you to visit after my tour.
Oh, okay.
So if there's no more questions about flags on this side of the wall, I'm going to talk about just a few flags on this side of the wall. Just go squish them a little bit. So I'm going to be talking about some Regimen Flags, which mean they were flown during battle. And the first time I heard that, I was like, why would you have somebody flying a flag during a battle when they could have a gun, man a cannon, bring some water, something other than just waving a flag? It seemed kind of decadent to me at first, but then I realized and was further explained why Regimen Flags were so important. So, imagine yourself on the battlefield. It's very smoky, chaotic. There's guns and cannons flying every which way, and you're just trying to keep your head on, right? However, during this time it's so chaotic, you might become disoriented. So if you get turned around a little bit and you see this flag, you realize that you're shooting at your own men. Turn around, you're facing the wrong way. So these flags were just to orient people. So first regiment flag I'm going to talk about is the Battle of Bunker Hill flag right over here. So the Battle of Bunker Hill was an early battle during the Revolution, and it was an important battle, but we didn't win it actually. We did get severely beaten in this battle, but it was a very important battle because this was the first battle where America really proved themselves as a force to be reckoned with. This was the first battle where Great Britain was like, oh my gosh, let's re-strategize. The Americans are a lot harder than I thought they'd be to keep under our wing.
Oh, this is a flag of Bunker, the one with the tree, right?
Yep, Battle of Bunker Hill flag. It's if we take a closer look at it, it is kind of a plain flag. I mean, it's just red and it has the pine tree. But the pine tree is really important because that is the emblem for all of the campaigns, all of the battles fought in the Northern Campaign. So all of the battles fought in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and so on. A lot of the regiment flags would have a pine tree on them.
You know, this pine tree is the symbol of the northern states.
Yep.
Took place in Massachusetts, Boston, Massachusetts.
Yes.
Yeah, I had a comment. I mean, isn't that pine tree, doesn't it remind you of the country Lebanon?
Does it what?
It reminds me of the country Lebanon.
Why do they have?
I mean,
pine
the
on
tree
it?
in the center.
Oh, I didn't even make that connection. Interesting. So, pine tree was the emblem for all of the battles fought in the Northern Campaign, and for all the battles fought in the Southern Campaign, there was the join or die rattlesnake. You already know it. You're like, join or die rattlesnake. I wish we had the flag up, but we don't at the moment. But hopefully you guys know what that looks like. Those are for all of the Southern Campaign battles. So, moving on, I'm going to talk about my favorite flag. This is the Battle of White Plains flag. And if we take a closer look at this flag, we have the sword and the staff crossing with a blue cap on it, as well as the words liberty or death. Does anybody notice anything odd about this flag, though?
Okay, I noticed that liberty or death means that we have a free to live or die.
It was life or death.
Liberty means for free and stay alive. Death means to kill. That's what it means, those two swords, like an X.
Does anybody notice anything else kind of odd about this flag?
It had swords.
It's two different swords.
One is a staff. The yellow is a staff and the blue one's a sword. But in particular, the text, if you notice liberty or death, the A is backwards.
So how comes the A turns around like this one?
So there are a couple theories about why the A is backwards. In my opinion, the best theory about why the A is backwards is that it's a spy code.
A spy
Somebody
code.
put that on that flag. It was easily communicated to a lot of people who would be looking for that, would notice the backwards A and understand that something was communicated to them. However, people that don't have the cipher, don't know the code, like you and me, are scratching their head kind of thinking, did they make a mistake? Which is the other widely believed theory, more commonly believed theory about why the A is backwards, is that literacy rates were lower back then and this was just a good old-fashioned common mistake. Whoops.
That's strange, the A was backwards, should be forward.
Yeah, of course. If you guys come back, though, tell people the spy theory, because it's a lot cooler, right? So, talking about the sword, the blue sword and the yellow staff crossing with the blue cap up top. I'm going to talk about that, the symbolism in there a little bit, but before I do we have any Harry Potter fans?
Yeah.
Yes. Awesome. So, if you guys have seen Harry Potter and you remember the scene when Dobby is presented a sock and he becomes a free elf, the blue cap is the same thing. Let me explain. So during antiquity, so thinking about the Roman Empire, Julius Caesar, they had slaves back then, and if you wanted to free your slave, you would give him a blue cap to wear. So if you saw him walking through the town square or anything, you'd be like, oh, he's cool, he has his blue cap, he's free. So same with Dobby. This is like Dobby's sock, is the blue cap. So there are a couple reasons why we have this blue cap on this flag. The first was throughout Revolutionary art, we made a lot of references to antiquity because we wanted to recreate the perfect democracy with our own new country. We really wanted to replicate it, so we would make a lot of references in our art to it. And the second reason is we felt like slaves under Britain's rule and we wanted that blue cap. So that's why it's on the flag.
Oh, wow.
That's all I have about flags. Any questions before we move on?
The other flag I saw right next to this other flag, it's like it's the coat of arms, the symbol.
This is the emblem of New York. So hopefully it looks familiar. Did you drop your card?
You write some?
All right, if nobody has any more questions, I'm a little sick of talking about flags.
Let's move on to see another event.
If you guys will follow along, here's the next group.
Okay. All right, what do we sign first one?
We're not standing.
Just need a...
All right, everybody, welcome to the Dunsmore Gallery. This gallery has 47 paintings in it, and they're all done by one man named John Ward Dunsmore. Dunsmore was not alive during the Revolution. He was alive after. He was born in the 1850s and passed away in the 1940s. So, Dunsmore was not alive during the Revolutionary War. However, you might have thought so because all of his paintings are quite historically accurate. It was kind of like he was there. Dunsmore was a very diligent historian and did his homework. And as a product of all of his research, he created these paintings because he was a member of the Sons of the Revolution of New York. Has anyone heard of this organization before?
No, I mean, John Ward Dunsmore. That's very nice.
So,
What did he
John-
pass it?
I'm not sure. He lived a long time. I think he lived into his mid-80s or so, so probably old age. So, John Ward Dunsmore was a member of the Sons of the Revolution of New York, and this organization formed after the Revolution to promote the education of the Revolution to future generations. So they were basically like equivalent to a bunch of teachers just trying to spread the word about the Revolution. So Dunsmore was a member of this organization, and he did so. He promoted the education of the Revolution by sharing his imagery. He was classically trained as a fine painter, and this is the product of a lot of his work. He kind of had my dream job where he got to paint as much as he could every year and just got a yearly stipend for doing so.
Wow.
Pretty awesome. So the Sons of the Revolution of New York, I talk about them because they own this building. They built... You've never heard that noise before?
I hear that's a Liberty Bell.
So, the Sons of the Revolution of New York, they bought this building in 1904 to save it from demolition. It was going to be bought out by a big company who was going to tear it down and make like a parking lot or something really boring. So the Sons of the Revolution of New York scooped up the building with the help of the Daughters of the Revolution, and they opened up, reopened up Fraunces Tavern, but they opened it up as a museum just a couple years later in 1907. This obviously was to further promote the education of the Revolution. And we just celebrated our 110th anniversary last year. So, pretty cool. This is the 8th oldest museum in Manhattan. And before you ask, the first one is the New York Historical Society. Because I get that question all the time. So, first painting I'm going to talk about is over here in this corner. I'm going to be talking about some details that might be hard to see, so I'll encourage you to come closer. So the title of this painting is John Adams proposing George Washington to be the Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. Do we even need a wall label? With that title, I feel like you pretty much know what's going on.
To be the commander of
Quite a
the
long title. So,
Wall Army.
this is the second meeting of the Continental Congress, and the question I always get is, well, what happened the first meeting? Why are we depicting the second here? So the first time the Continental Congress met, we wanted to break free from Great Britain, and we wanted to do so peacefully. We wanted to extend that olive branch breakup without any bloodshed on either side. Great Britain said, no, we are not just going to obviously give you your freedom, you have to earn it. So this is the second meeting where we decided that we were going to take a slightly more aggressive approach and form the Continental Army. So we need somebody to lead the Continental Army. In the center of the canvas, we have, in the purple coat over here, we have John Adams proposing George Washington to be the Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. So we have John Adams proposing George Washington. On the right side of the canvas, in the blue and red military jacket, we have the always recognizable George Washington. You can always pick him out in any painting here, not only because he's on the money, but because he was always in military garb. You could always pick him out. George Washington hears his name being proposed. He's humbled and flattered by this proposal and leaves the room so they can fairly discuss the pros and cons of him becoming the Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. So, the best part about this painting, though, is not the main event itself, but as John Adams is proposing George Washington to be the Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, on the left side of the canvas, we have a man in a mustard jacket, and he's propping himself up, right? This is John Hancock,
Which one are you talking about? Which one's John?
John Hancock.
over here in the mustard coat.
The mustard coat, right here?
Yep, over here.
Oh, mustard coat.
Mustard coat. So he's kind of propping himself up a little bit. And that's because John Hancock gets a little cocky and he's about to accept the nomination that he thinks is for him. Ooh, I know, I get everybody knows. It's like, whoops. So, John Hancock is about to stand up and accept this nomination that isn't for him. He's expecting to hear John Hancock. He hears George Washington and is very embarrassed, as you might expect. So he's creeping back down in his seat. Hope nobody noticed that I tried to accept this nomination that wasn't for me at all. So, the reason that I love this painting and that I'm like, I can't even like talk about it without chuckling is because Dunsmore and a lot of historians, they kind of get a bad rep for being, hold on, watch out a little bit, watch out from the wall.
They need the paint.
Historians, they kind of get a bad rep for being a little boring and dry, and I would like to, with every ounce in me, fight that notion and say that Dunsmore is a comedian because he did not need to include this. This is hysterical, and this doesn't really add to the story. Obviously, George Washington accepts this nomination, and he leads us to our success at the end of the Revolution. But Dunsmore thinks he's a comedian as well as a historian and includes this very funny detail. Every artist, every brushstroke is deliberate, and he planned out the composition of this canvas to make sure to include and highlight and even give him a little bit more of a highlight, because if you take a closer look, everybody is sitting down and has kind of an even plane. The only people that are standing that Dunsmore wants you to focus on is George Washington, John Adams, and John Hancock. What's up?
It was a few years ago when I went to Philadelphia, and they showed a movie, and they said in the movie George Washington did everything in Philadelphia. And they didn't say nothing about here.
I'm sad about that, but Philadelphia wants to take all the credit. But New York was the first capital of the United States.
I did not think it was the second or third or second.
So, last thing I'm going to mention about this painting is another comedic little motif that Dunsmore includes is just to the left of George Washington we have Benjamin Franklin, who is a little older than everybody else. He's just a generation older, so he's kind of thinking, When's lunch already, right?
Uh-oh.
I'm hungry.
Benjamin
He
Franklin.
looks kind of done with it, right?
That's him.
What's
Benjamin
that?
Franklin got
Just
struck by
before the
the
revolution,
electricity.
the early
Right,
1770s. I don't know exactly when he got proposed, 1775.
1775, before they made the Declaration of Independence.
Yep.
The starting in 1776, James, the Declaration of Independence.
1776.
Benjamin Franklin
That's
1775.
him.
was, Benjamin
Who discovered electricity.
flying the kite with the key on it.
Yeah, I remember that. I hear about that one.
Every day before everything started invented.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I mean, so John Adams made a proposal for George Washington about what? I mean,
To be the commander-in-chief of the
Commander-in-Chief
Continental Army.
Of the Continental Army.
Yep. Any more questions?
No.
Okay. 30. All right, so I'll give you guys a few minutes to take a closer look at some paintings in this gallery. If I could, I would spend my entire tour in here and talk about all of the paintings in this gallery because I love them so much. So take a closer look at some things that interest you that I obviously didn't get to cover and come up to me if you have any questions. That one.
You can see it's John Wall,
Yeah, it's beautiful.
What about
George Washington.
What about him?
Oh, yeah, you mentioned something about John Hancock?
John Hancock stands up and he thinks he's going to be nominated, but he's not. George Washington is, so he's embarrassed and he sits back down.
So what about where we're celebrating the Independence Day on July 4th, 1776?
What about it?
It's on the Independence Day every July 4th.
Yep.
Everything tonight was real.
Who's the guy with the mustache over there?
He's a Polish general.
I see his name, Casimir Nancy. Seventeen 48, died 1779. General Casimir Polanski. They named a street after him, Polanski Street in Brooklyn.
Like George Washington using the chopping with the cherry tree.
Over here?
Yeah.
George Washington is over here, but I don't see Benjamin Franklin.
I moved that
I
guy.
see George Washington
Yep,
over there.
yep.
They have accomplished to arrange the evacuation of New York City in 1783.
Yep, I'm about to, this is a perfect segue, I'm about to talk about evacuation in the next room.
So what about George Washington chopping the cherry tree?
He also never told a lie, right? So, does anybody have any questions before we depart this room?
I have a question about these calendars.
Yes, I love the calendars. So, Dunsmore, he was a member of the Sons of the Revolution of New York, whose main goal was to promote the education of the revolution. He did so by painting all of these paintings. However, they weren't extremely accessible to the public at all times, and he also wanted to continue to educate the population about the revolution. And so he did so by teaming up with a bank who would distribute calendars, and he would create these genre scenes. So all these images are by Dunsmore. So they aren't directly related to the revolution because they aren't battle scenes or anything, but they are genre scenes of what it was like to live in the 13 colonies. Good question. Any other questions?
How did they brought up today about these calendars, these red days, like December 1st and December 1st?
So these calendars are marking when interest, it says over here, that interest is due to the bank and other things like that. So these were mainly days you needed to pay taxes.
What, pay taxes?
Yes.
So what was the calendar? It was the 1912 through the 17th.
1912 to 1917.
Yes.
Those are the name of the company, the bank, Title Guarantee and Trust
If
Company.
you guys will follow me, we're gonna move into the next room over here with the star wallpaper.
The star wallpaper. So next one we're going to do for the star wallpaper. So Lauren's going to talk about the star wallpaper. See what you can do in the next one.
We're gonna be talking about stuff in this
Okay.
cabinet right here.
You can see the pictures right over here. And also I see the coins. And also like
I'm gonna be
the
talking about
frame.
stuff in this cabinet right here.
This cabinet on the 10. So what are those pictures on the Washington in glory?
All right, pop quiz. What are George Washington's teeth made of? Yes, that's one of them. So, waiting for somebody to say wood, but this is like the first tour where nobody said wood. So A+ for everybody because it wasn't wood. So, despite what your grade school history teachers might have told you, George Washington's teeth were not made of wood. I'm sorry if any of you are elementary school history teachers.
George Washington's teeth?
So, George Washington's teeth were not made of wood. They were made of 3 different materials. One of them was ivory. The other 2 were animal teeth and other human teeth.
That's called a dental.
Eek, gross. So, George Washington's teeth were not made of wood. They were made of these other 3 materials. And he was really well known for the fact that he was always complaining about his dentures and always wanting a new set. Him and his dentist got really close. So George Washington took one of his real teeth, stuck it in a pendant, so the dentist could wear it close to his heart.
Wow.
And we have it, it's right over here on the left. It's under the huge magnifying glass.
It says Washington's dentures were composed of animal and human teeth, not wood. Dr. John Greenwood made 5 separate sets for Washington, who seems to have been in constant search for more comfortable dentures. It was a gift of William H. Brown. Dr. John Greenwood, United States, 1789 to 1798. 2 fragments.
It comes with the earrings.
Unbelievable.
I usually have half of my tour group lunge forward and go, this is so cool, and then I have the other half who kind of back away. They're like, thanks, but no thanks, don't really want to see it.
George Washington's teeth.
But I got a point of it.
That's over there.
Oh. That just made with the
It's were composed of animal and human
animal
teeth.
teeth.
Animal teeth engraved.
It turns into the earrings. You can hear that.
I've never heard anybody touch it before. I don't know if you're supposed to touch it.
Don't touch it, James.
Never heard it.
Just look around for it. That's the George Washington teeth with the animal teeth.
Yes, when I went to the park in Philadelphia, baseball park, and they have literally, and they have the bell in the park too. How come isn't that something?
That's in Philadelphia, right?
That's in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
In
See the
Pennsylvania.
Liberty Bell, Donald? That's in Pennsylvania.
I know all about it. I was there and I saw a picture of it.
Donald, I saw the Liberty Bell many times in Philadelphia.
Like, I remember when I went to the trip to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania to see the Liberty Bell.
No.
Does anybody have any questions about George Washington's relics? Which is a question I never thought I'd ask anybody.
So, about the George Washington's teeth, why they be made with earrings with George Washington?
This is a pendant, so it would be
That's
worn
the
on a
pendants.
necklace
A
around
pendant.
the neck. Yep,
A necklace.
A necklace?
Yes.
Used to wear it.
yep.
Yeah, for a woman.
Very proud.
Like a jewelry.
Right.
Are you waiting for something?
They look like
I want to see it.
clouds of old men.
Jay, we look at the window for? It's just partly cloudy.
Okay. You guys will come over here. I'm going to be talking about one of the first spies of the United States. So,
See what's
anyone
the
heard of Nathan Hale?
Yeah, he was American patriot.
American?
He was. Does anyone know what happened to Nathan Hale?
Got executed?
Sadly, yes. Does anybody, actually, real question, what were his last words?
Liberty or death?
I regret that I have that one life to give to my country.
Exactly.
I
That was
only
taken,
regret I had but one life to lose for my country.
give, but yes. And
That was his statement, his final
that
words.
was, so those final words were a myth, taken from a play.
So who got tied on Nathan Hale?
So, starting off with the Nathan Hale. Nathan Hale was a young patriot, just graduated from Yale and became a high school teacher with his close friend Benjamin Talmadge, who I'm about to talk about in a minute. Nathan Hale is asked by George Washington to go to Long Island to collect some intelligence and bring it back to him. He sends Nathan Hale with no training over to Long Island to be a spy. Within 10 days of Nathan Hale arriving in Long Island, he gets caught and hanged.
Oh, that's
So,
really hangover.
what happened in these 10 days, right?
It's like a hangman.
Sadly,
This is his
yes.
picture.
Nathan Hale is taking notes around ports. He's asking a lot of people a lot of questions, and there's a British general named Robert Rogers. That's somebody else, haha. Robert Rogers notices that Nathan Hale is taking all of these notes, and he thinks there's something fishy about him. So he invites him out to lunch. So Nathan Hale and British General Robert Rogers are out to lunch, and Robert Rogers says, I'm just caught behind enemy lines. I am totally for America's freedom. Nathan Hale says, oh, great, I'm a spy. So they cheers to freedom.
That was Roger.
Just so you know, Nathan Hale did not have
Robert
any spy
Rogers.
training, so he was a little naive in revealing his true identity as a spy. So, Robert Rogers realizes that he caught Nathan Hale as a spy, so he invites him out to lunch the next day, which the tavern is surrounded. So Nathan Hale is caught. He does not get a trial because he's caught in civilian clothing, so he's automatically hanged
Wow.
Lunch
What is
And he
or
pins his
lounge?
arms to his
for
body.
being a spy.
You hope.
Yeah.
That's not
That
good.
lunch or a
Robert Rogers,
lounge?
it was not good at all. So, this is a bummer. Poor Nathan Hale, within 10 days of being sent to Long Island, is hanged. And
That is bad.
really
And
bad.
they pins his arms to his body. A portrait the French criticized when the model for the statue was exhibited at the Salon in Paris in 1891. Stanford White designed the drumlight base of pink
What
marble.
did he go to Long Island for?
So he went over there, it was controlled by the British, and he went over there to spy on them, so to collect information about how many men they had stationed there and where they were stationed and things like that.
Yeah.
Executed for that?
Military
Yeah,
secret.
executed.
Exactly. So, luckily, well not luckily, but Nathan Hale's death wasn't completely in vain because this really lit the fire under George Washington, and he was thinking, oh my gosh, I need to do better than this. I didn't give Nathan Hale any training, and he died within a week. So, that brings
That was
us
sad.
over to the end of the room over
Poor
here.
Nathan Hale.
Poor Nathan Hale.
Yes.
So,
Executed.
brings us to Benjamin Talmadge's diary. So as I was saying, Nathan Hale, his death was extremely untimely, and George Washington goes, I need to do better than this. So what does he do? He forms the Culper Spy Ring. So the Culper Spy Ring is the first intelligence agency for the United States. The modern CIA we have today took a lot of secrets and techniques from the Culper Spy Ring. So, this is Benjamin Talmadge's diary. In 1778, Benjamin Talmadge and George Washington formed the Culper Spy Ring with a few other key players like Abraham Woodhull, Caleb Brewster, Robert Townsend, and other people you might know if you watch Turn. Benjamin Talmadge's grandson, Frederick, who was a member of the Sons of the Revolution of New York, inherited his diary and donated it to the museum on its opening in 1907. If we take a closer look at this diary, I am just green with envy of his penmanship. It is absolutely beautiful. In school, I did not learn to write like this. I learned to type really fast on the computer, and I regret this, because this is beautiful. People don't write like this anymore, and I'm really jealous.
Only
But
type.
besides that, this diary holds a lot of secrets about the Culper spy ring, such as how they transferred intelligence, who was in the spy ring, stationing where, and things like that. So, some techniques that the Culper spy ring used, Benjamin Talmadge developed he developed a code where he would substitute letters for digits, and so he'd be sending people a bunch of numbers, and then they would have to take their code and figure out what he's trying to say. Other tactics were invisible ink, as well as taking little notes, writing them on a small piece of silk, coiling them up, and putting them in a small silver ball about the size of a musket ball so they could swallow it without being harmed if they were caught. One last technique is they would take that little piece of silk, coil it up, and stick it in the hollow quill of a feather. So a lot of these things, like for example, the invisible ink and the codes are still used by our CIA today. Obviously, were improved with the evolution of technology, but base idea was from these notes. So,
That's the diary.
this is his diary.
His personal diary.
Yep.
Very interesting.
Any questions about Talmadge's diary or the Culper spy ring?
So how long does Benjamin write in the diary in the book?
How long? How long does he have this book?
His personal diary, how long he write it, how many years?
How many years?
I don't know. That's actually,
His
I've
personal
never been
memory.
asked that before. I have no clue how long he kept this diary. I don't know
Wrote
how much.
down as an account of the event in his memoir.
That's a good question that I am so sorry I don't know the answer to. Any other questions before we move on?
Raise your hand.
Where can we read it? Like the full version?
When what?
Where can we read this?
Online.
Continental Army officer and manager of Washington Secret Service. His grandson, Frederick S. Talmadge, was the great
I appreciate it.
William
It's
Floyd.
really good. Thank you $1,000,000.
Benjamin Talmadge was the only witness of Washington's Fraunces Tavern farewell, who wrote down an account of the event in the men's memoir.
That's about Benjamin Talmadge.
That is so ancient.
All right, guys, if you'll follow me, we're gonna head downstairs.
Okay.
Okay, downstairs.
Oh, are you with us?
Heading down to downstairs.
Oh. Did you remember?
You see, we got the next one. So here comes the next one. That's about the best of George Washington.
So while we're waiting for the rest of the group, I'm gonna ask you guys to take a minute and study the portraits on the walls.
What's the paintings about George Washington? What's the portrait?
That's a bust of George Washington.
Of Washington.
Bust of George Washington.
Marble stand.
I find the word best.
We got
on that.
pictures.
No pictures.
It was
There
a
were
bust.
There was no cameras at
I
that
don't
time.
know honestly made that bust of Washington. It was John Antoine Hoover. Jean Antoine Hoover.
This was the half century
1786.
before the invention of photographs. So does anybody notice anything odd about the portraits
You can
on the
study
wall?
how you can learn about George Washington.
Kyle, she's asking a question.
So how come George Washington's studying?
Anybody notice anything odd about the portraits on the wall?
Yeah, I think George Washington, about the time of his death,
is a portrait in Philadelphia, 1798.
all the pictures on the wall is actually George Washington.
They are all of George Washington, however, they don't all really look like George Washington. That one looks a lot like him, but this one over here does not look like him at all. Also, all of the
That's not
ones
George
to the right over here,
It was a different fellow.
Yeah, 1775.
none of these look like George Washington. I'd be kind of offended if I looked like George Washington and there was a rumor spread that that's what I look like. So.
Different guys portrait.
They're all of George Washington. However, a lot of them were done by artists in Europe who never saw George Washington. So they just painted or depicted whatever rumors they heard. So you might be thinking, why do people in Europe want a picture of George Washington? And that was because at the time, a lot of European countries still lived under kings and had monarchs, and they heard what was going on in America and that we were getting rid of their king.
We were under England.
Yes.
at that
So-
time.
Everybody else in Europe is like, oh my gosh, they're getting rid of their king, that's awesome. I want a picture of George Washington. So they go to their local artist and they commission a portrait of George Washington. But let's say I'm an artist and I don't know what George Washington looks like, but I also know that my patron does not know what George Washington looks like. So I'm going to paint whoever I want, tell you it's George Washington, write his name on the bottom, take my money and run.
On the bottom?
So this is why we have a portrait gallery full of George Washington with varying degrees of accuracy, honestly. However, I will say, excuse me, right over here, this is the most accurate depiction of George Washington you're going to see because this is a recreation of a bust that was made by sticking plaster all over George Washington's face. So this is definitely what he looks like. If you take out a dollar bill, you go, yeah, it's pretty much what he looks like.
Look how sculpting the George Washington.
All right. Anybody have any questions before we move to the long room?
I have a question.
What's up?
So how are they sculpting the George Washington like this one?
So this is a recreation of a bust that was originally done by sticking plaster all over his face, which is just like gauze and clay and
A
water.
clay. So
Yep.
what kind of clay?
This one's terracotta.
Terracotta. And the color is bronze.
Yeah, it's terracotta. Yeah, brown.
Brown maybe. Or I can say bronze.
All right, so if you guys will file in the long room right over here. Yes, go around, just to the right.
Long room. That goes in here.
Well, maybe that one with the color. All of those people look French. It's ridiculous. File all the way in, guys.
Coming through. All right. This is the long room. And you can see all kind of dining with the candles on it. Also with a wood barrel. Also with where you can see that.
Alright. Welcome to the long room. It is such a long room. I even have to project my voice and I can kind of hear it echo. So, long room, this is where a lot of parties happened. A lot of general parties that happened throughout the tavern's usage. However, hey guys, just at the end of my tour, obviously welcome to stay for the best part of it. So, did a little bit about Samuel Fraunces, whose portrait is on your left. Samuel Fraunces was born in 1722-23 in the West Indies and came over to New York in 1775. 1755. Oh my gosh, somebody needs to quiz me and fact check my dates. So, 1755, Samuel Fraunces comes to New York, and less than a decade later, in 1762, he buys Fraunces Tavern, and he opens it up as Queen's Head Tavern, because at that point everything was named after the Queen. And then after the Revolution, Queen Street became Pearl Street, Queen's Head Tavern became Fraunces Tavern. So, a little bit about Fraunces Tavern. He was actually a little bit of a spy spy. So at the early years of the Revolution, he sensed that New York City was going to be occupied by the British, so he flees to Elizabeth, New Jersey, just across the Hudson River. Samuel Fraunces, sadly, even though he escaped, he was soon captured in Elizabeth and brought back to New York City, and then he became a cook under James Robertson, which is the name I got and mixed up earlier, so you might have heard me say that. So, General James Robertson took Samuel Fraunces to be his prisoner of war cook. I don't know about you, but I would not want the enemy to be cooking all of my meals. Who thought that was a good idea?
I don't know.
How can it be
I don't know
helpful?
either. Anyway, James Robertson was very lucky though because Samuel Fraunces never poisoned his food. Samuel Fraunces took advantage of his position as a prisoner of war, and he would sneak food and money to other prisoners of war and even helped a couple of them escape. So, also during the time of Samuel Fraunces being in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and also being a prisoner of war, he had a loyalist son-in-law who would run the tavern in his absence. So throughout the decade during the roughly decade of the Revolutionary War, there were a lot of meetings that happened in this room. A lot of people would come here because this was a very convenient place for everybody to meet. This was the center where everything was happening. So besides the daily life of the tavern, there were two dates in particular where very important things happened in this room. And the first one was November 25th, 1783, Evacuation Day. Has anyone heard of Evacuation Day?
No.
I heard it meaning that the countries get rid of every single thing. They get out of
All the British, farewell, get out of here. So, the reason that nobody except for you has really heard of this holiday is because we don't celebrate it anymore. So, Evacuation Day, November 25th, 1783, was the last day that the British were in New York City. New York was the longest occupied state during the Revolution, so once they left New York, they officially left the entire country. So, Evacuation Day, as you can imagine, we had a huge parade, and it ended with a big feast here at the tavern.
Celebration.
Yep. And the reason that we don't celebrate that holiday, actually two reasons. First reason is November 25th, close to another holiday.
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving.
So since Thanksgiving kind of rotates, it kind of conflicted a lot. But the real reason we don't celebrate Evacuation Day anymore is World War I. Who were our greatest allies?
World War I just started in 1911 through 1917.
Who did we work with during World War I?
England.
The British, exactly.
Oh, yeah, the
So
British.
it's kind of rude to celebrate Evacuation Day, but then work with them for World War I, so we don't celebrate Evacuation Day anymore. So just a little over a week later, December 4th, 1783, the real reason that Fraunces Tavern is such a historic landmark, George Washington gives his farewell address here. So, December 4th, 1783, George Washington is saying farewell to all his commanding officers. He brings them all to the tavern to say goodbye. He picked December 4th because he allotted himself 3 weeks to travel down to Mount Vernon where Martha was, because he promised her she'd be home for Christmas, and he doesn't tell a lie, and he doesn't want to make Martha upset, right? So he also allotted himself that time to ride down on horseback, also stop at Annapolis, which was the capital at the time of the country, to resign his current position. He wanted to go back down to Mount Vernon to be the gentleman farmer he always wanted to be. So, December 4th, 1783, George Washington gathers 30 or 40 of his commanding officers, like Benjamin Talmadge, Henry Knox, and imagine I am 6'2". I have a white curly wig on, and my voice is like 2 octaves deeper. So George Washington addresses his commanding officers and says, "With a heartfelt of love and gratitude, I must now take leave of you. I most devoutly wish that your latter days are as prosperous and happy as your former days have been glorious and honorable." With these extremely heartfelt words, right next to very tall George Washington, we have the even taller Henry Knox, who's 6'4". They break down, hug, and cry. All of these tough commanding officers who just won the revolution are blubbering babies. They don't want to see George go. They don't love the guy and they don't want to see him leave. So George Washington, after saying farewell to his commanding officers, he continues after that really heartfelt quote. He says, "I hope that you could all come up to me and bid me farewell one last time." As we all know, it wasn't really the last time because he comes up back north less than a decade later to be the first president of the United States. So, as George Washington said farewell to his troops, I now say farewell to you guys, and I hope you enjoyed my tour.
I appreciate it, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Laurel.